It is the tragedy that has shocked the world again as America's gun violence epidemic continues to wreak havoc with absolutely heartbreaking consequences. This week, an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas, this is equivalent to our primary school, was sadly the location of the worst school shooting in a decade, the massacre of 19 young children and their 2 teachers by an 18-year-old loner. America has this perverse addiction to their guns. But why are young children too often the target of these gun-toting maniacs? This is the 27th school shooting in the United States just this year, and that's among 200 mass shootings already this year in the States. Last year, there were 693 mass shootings in the United States with 20,000 gun-related homicides recorded. It's just madness. As always, American politicians offer their thoughts and prayers, but do they have the backbone of someone like John Howard, who in 1996, after Port Arthur, took action and fixed the problem? Earlier today, I caught up with Adam Creighton, Washington correspondent for The Australian.
It's not very promising, I must say. I mean, there are many massacres in the US, as you know, and some very horrific ones. And yet, after all of them, there's really no reform. There's no change to the gun laws. And so, I'd like to think that there'd be some change this time. There's certainly a few bills floating around Congress to tweak the rules here and there. But it's interesting to note both the major parties really don't, at least in my view, have the stomach to make the change. And that is because 30% of Americans have a gun and 40% of American households have access to a gun. And so when you have that many guns in the country, and there's some 400 million plus guns, so some more guns than people in the US, it's extremely difficult to regulate them. Because even if you do regulate at the shop front, so to speak, people can still buy guns on the black market. They can still sell them to each other privately. So it's a really insoluble and terrible problem in my view.
You came up with an interesting line in what you wrote today, Adam, that some of the states that have restrictions on ownership of guns and have the toughest gun laws are often the ones with the most problems.
Well, look, I mean, I'm not sure of the precise statistics, but certainly you have states like Illinois and New York and California, which do have a much tougher gun laws than, say, Texas and Florida, because ultimately gun regulation is a state issue in the US. So it's probably worth pointing out that even if the federal government did something, there'd be all sorts of constitutional challenges to that because it's a state responsibility. But look, I mean, there's extraordinary amount of crime in, say, Chicago. That's often an example that's given. I think it's a valid example. That's a state with tough gun laws. And also New York as well. Just 2 weeks ago, we had the shocking massacre in Buffalo of 10 people. And, that's in a state with so-called red flag laws, with tough gun laws. So, there's not a strong correlation between the strength of laws in particular states and the amount of gun crime.
Taking guns out of the hands of younger people, is it achievable?
Well, certainly this is something that I thought just from examining all the evidence. I mean, if you look at the sorts of people that commit these massacres, they are inevitably young men, almost exclusively young men. They tend to come from broken homes as well. I think that's worth pointing out. I think that there's the motivating force here is not just guns. I think it's the profound social decay in the US that we're seeing, at least in some segments of the community. It's worth pointing out that in the 1960s, 1970s, in many cases, gun laws were more liberal than in the US, but there were hardly any shootings. I mean, the number of mass shootings, I should have said, has trebled, has increased tenfold in some cases. So there's a profound social problem there, and changing the rules, I think, is just scratching the surface. It's a far deeper societal problem.